hopefully have time at the end as well. So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this workshop, Data Deposit from a College Perspective. So I will be introducing all the presenters shortly. But first, I wanted to say thank you we are grateful to Compute Ontario for providing funding for this collaborative project. It's been a collaborative endeavor between the heads of applied research and the Ontario College's RDM community of practice. So this is the final in our series of workshops, but stay tuned. We're already in discussion about possibly offering more opportunities. Next slide, please, Christina. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today. So while we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands that we each call home. And we do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and cultures. I am presenting today from outside of London, Ontario, and I would like to respectfully acknowledge this land as the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Attawandaron, and Wendat peoples. If you would like to take a moment to do the same in the chat, you are welcome to do so. Next slide, please, Christina. So our presenters today, so on the slide here, we've got Lingling Zhang. So she is the metadata and systems librarian at Sheridan College. I'm Donna Sevenpiper. I'm a librarian as well, but for the past few years, I've been embedded in the research office at Fanshawe College. Joanna Blair, Scholarly Communication and Liaison Librarian at Centennial College, and Kaylin Caspery, STEM and Data Librarian at Durham College. And we'd like to acknowledge Christina DeRoche's help as well. We call her our MC, a lot of behind-the-scenes support today. Christina is the Director of Research at Canadore College. Christina, did you want to launch this first poll?
Yep, so I'm going to launch a poll, folks. If you could take some time to answer the questions. There you go. Just trying to assess who is here and what our audience is made up of. Just see. So we should see live poll results there. Lots of good mix of librarians, administrators, some faculty, which is excellent to see. Some research staff. Okay, so we're going to launch one more poll for you just to gauge where everybody's learning's at this time. Did you attend session 1 or 2? Good mix of session 1 and 2. Oh, seeing some changes. Some session 1, some session 2. Some saying none at all. So nice to see you here. For those that didn't attend the last 2 sessions. Okay, there you go, Donna.
Fantastic. All right, so on the next slide, just a quick workshop to recap. So in that workshop, which was called Data Management Planning in the College Sector, we provided an introduction to data management planning. We outlined the guiding principles. We demonstrated how to actually build a data management plan using the DMP Assistant, a free online tool. And we put in front of you some questions for consideration regarding your local context. And we'll do the same today. Next slide. So in this session, we are going to be moving on to the final pillar 3 of the tri-agency RDM policy. So we will be providing guidance related to the sharing, restricting, and preserving of data. We'll provide an introduction to repository options, outline the benefits of data deposit, show you how to find a repository, provide a Borealis overview and a demonstration. And again, as I said, we will be leaving you with some questions for consideration at your institution. Next slide. I will now pass it to my colleague, Joanna.
Thanks, Donna. Hi, everyone. So I wanted to take a step back and just talk about the tri-agency policy on research data management, because that's really driving a lot of the conversations at colleges right now around RDM and around data deposit. So when folks talk about the tri-agency policy on RDM, they generally point to 3 pillars. So this was enacted in 2021, and it asks that each institution so this is the first pillar, each institution that manages tri-agency funds develop an institutional strategy that outlines how they will support researchers with tri-agency funds going forward. The second 2 pillars are really the researcher's responsibility. So the second one, data management plans, we talked about in session 2, asks folks with, well, it mentions that data management plans are best practices, and certain funding opportunities with the tri-agency will require data management plans as part of the adjudication process moving forward. The third pillar, which is also the researcher's responsibility, is data deposit. And this pillar is around asking researchers with tri-agency funds to deposit the data that they have produced with the tri-agency funds when they publish their research. So this is the one we're going to be talking about today. If you want to go to the next slide. Great. So I thought we would start with a knowledge check to see where everyone is with regard to research data management and data deposit. So the first question is a true and false question, and it asks, does the tri-agency RDM policy require that you make all of your research open?
Yeah, I know we do have like a Canada College residence building. They are managed on their own. I think for the fall, they were super tight on space.
Lots of responses coming in there.
Mm-hmm.
False seems to be the majority of the response.
All right, and I'm very impressed with this with the knowledge. This knowledge check, everyone got it right. This is indeed false. So the RDM policy with regard to data deposit is not an open data policy. You are not required to make all of your data open. The language in the tri-agency policy recognizes that not all data is appropriate for deposit. So it does encourage researchers to make their data available where appropriate. And I'll point specifically to some of that language. So good job. We'll do the next knowledge check. In order to deposit data, your institution has to have a data repository. True or false?
The responses are starting to come in now. Lots saying false. A few saying true. Oh, now we're switching.
All right. Again, this group clearly knows their stuff with regard to data deposit. This is great. So again, yes, this is false. It would be great if every institution had their own data repository, but those of us at small colleges know that's probably not going to happen. But the good news is there are freely available data repositories out there that any researchers can access to deposit their data. And in fact, some publishers and some journals will maintain their own data repository for their authors to submit their data. And again, we will point to those throughout this session. Okay, so the last true false question. Sensitive data must be destroyed 5 years after research is published. True or false?
Yeah, we usually in North Bay, we try to have it 12 maximum, and I think we're probably about 10 maybe with 2.
The majority are still saying false.
All right. This is indeed a really knowledgeable crew. So well done, everyone. This is also false. And this used to be considered best practice that you would destroy your data after 5 years. But because
Oh, we seem to have lost Joanna.
Yeah, for sure.
Not sure what happened there. There she is.
All the details.
Joanna, you there? Okay, well, while we wait on Joanna, can one of you take over, Kaylin, Ling Ling, or Donna?
Yep, I can speak to the next slide, the tri-agency policy on data sharing. So this is some language that's coming directly from the tri-agency research data management policy. Direct quote: "So the grant recipients are required to deposit into a digital research repository all digital research data metadata code that directly supports the research conclusions that might be published." So there's some reassurance here that there is this idea that it would like to be reposited into that repository, though it is not necessarily a requirement. Yeah, I can move the slide forward. Okay, I hope that was okay. So they're not required to share the data. I really want to underscore that point. It's not a requirement. However, there is expectation that when it is allowed based on ethical, cultural, legal, and commercial requirements, that does happen. So providing that access when possible is sort of that underlying thought.
Kaylin, I can take over. I'm back.
you're back. Okay,
I
great.
don't know what happened there. I got kicked out. So I think you did a great job describing what's on this slide. So just a final reminder: provide appropriate access does not mean sharing data openly. There's lots of exceptions, and the tri-agency policy acknowledges that. So those of you who are worried that, oh no, I can't share my data, this is acknowledged within the policy. All right. I'm trying to navigate forward, but it won't let me. Can I get you to navigate forward, Christina?
There you go.
All right. And I'm not seeing it navigate forward. I seem to be having computer problems today, but that's okay. I'm just going to speak to the next slide. So this, when you can't share your data, I'll just say it's usually around data security. So things like ethical considerations. Maybe you did your study or started your study 5 years ago and you don't have letters, permission on the letters of consent. There might be a period of exclusivity. So perhaps you have put a ton of funding into developing your data set and you don't want to open it up yet. You need some time to get as many publications out of your data as possible so you can embargo your data. Commercial constraints, and this happens a lot in the college sector, where we have external partners that have IP issues and need to protect their IP, and the data can't be released. And then sensitive content, anything with identifiers, you don't want to make openly available. And again, we will speak to all of this a bit more moving forward. Christina, if you wouldn't mind navigating forward. So the rule of thumb is share whenever possible, but restrict when necessary. So I've got listed here 4 types of research data, and you may not want to share all of this, but I've got it cut here into 4 types. So there's raw data. This is where you might be doing transcripts. Okay, so it's not put together yet. And the second one there is curated data, where you've started to code things, you've cleaned your data, maybe you've done some analysis, and that might be the one that you publish. Okay, and associated with the published data, you will have metadata that describes the data. So if you want to think of the published data as a book in the library, the metadata would be what you put in the catalog. Things like title, author, date, descriptive information, subject headings. So it really provides access to the published data, but the published data itself, you might want to restrict, and there are tools to allow you to do that. So folks would only be able to access it if they have met certain criteria and if they have gone through you. So again, we will speak about that a bit more. And I think, yeah, I'm going to pass it over to Kaylin at this point. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about why preserve data. So there are many reasons. We've highlighted sort of the 3 big ones here on the slide. First, preserving research data is following FAIR principles of research data management. So that is referring to making data findable, accessible, interoperable, and allowing for reuse as applicable. Second, preserving research data is often required to satisfy funding agreements. We've been specifically talking about the tri-agency's requirements. That's of course a big one. And as other awards follow suit, it can be a requirement of other funding opportunities, both nationally and internationally. And then finally, preserving your research data is just best practice for research data management. So it's always good to be doing the best practices. Next slide, please. So next, we just wanted to highlight some of the guiding principles to consider when approaching data preservation. First are the trust principles for digital repositories, and all of these slides are linked. So when you access the slides, you can go and read more about these concepts as well. So the trust principles provide a common framework around discussion and implementation of digital preservation. Trust stands for transparency, responsibility, user focus, sustainability, and technology. The next two guiding principles, the principles of OCAP and the CARE principles, relate to the use and management of Indigenous data. So when looking at special considerations for Indigenous data, researchers might consider utilizing the First Nations principles of OCAP. OCAP stands for the ownership, control, access, and possession. There's lots of resources to learn more about these principles as a whole. For OCAP, there's a really great course offered by the First Nations Information Governance Center called The Fundamentals of OCAP. So that's another resource there. Another consideration would be the international CARE principles of Indigenous data governance. And CARE principles were developed by the Global Indigenous Alliance, GIDA, and the CARE acronym stands for Collective Benefit, Authority to Control, Responsibility, and Ethics. And finally, a final guiding principle would, of course, be the institutional policies that govern research data management, including data repositories and preservation at your own institutions. I'll pass this over to Donna.
Thanks, Kaylin. So this series of workshops has messaged over and over again that a big component of research data management is where and how you will store your data, both during and after your research project. Best practices for storing data after the life of your research project, so at project close, usually involves a data repository, and a data repository is simply a stable place to host your data. Next slide, please, Christina. So taking a moment to identify how they differ from other storage options. So unlike file hosting services or collaborative workspaces that you may already be familiar with, like Dropbox and SharePoint, research data repositories, they do things to help make research data accessible and usable in the long term. So for instance, they'll provide information about the data set so researchers can discover and learn about the data, provide either direct access, mechanisms for requesting access, and or conditions for the potential use of the data, and ensure that each data set has a persistent identifier like a DOI, a digital object identifier, to aid in discoverability and attribution. Next slide, please. Now, your institution may already facilitate access to an open institutional repository. So we thought it would also be helpful for you to outline how an institutional repository differs from a data repository. So looking at institutional repositories first, they're intended to house primarily like the academic materials of an institution. So these may be pre and or post prints of articles, dissertations, and so on. And they are often used for showcasing or even recruitment purposes. For instance, like the student capstone projects may be housed there. They're usually not used as collaborative space for researchers. And while they can accommodate some data files, for instance, like some Excel files, they really are not intended for raw data. And finally, institutional repositories are completely open, so it's difficult to set restrictions, parameters about what files can and cannot be accessed. So moving on to data repositories, they're intended to specifically host data sets and ideally for final deposit and long-term preservation, and they can be used as collaborative space. They may host open or restricted access materials, and they use specific metadata standards to make that data discoverable, accessible, and reusable. Possible to set different permissions in a data repository. We're going to show you that today. And they can have different distinctions, for instance, geography or subject matter. Moving on. And as well, we're outlining the benefits on this slide. So aside from the fact that tri-agency policy stipulates that we need to have mechanisms in place for data deposit, putting a positive spin on this, there are both researcher and institution benefits. So researcher benefits, as a researcher, this enables you to meet those funding and or publisher requirements. It improves the discovery and ideally the reuse of your data. It improves citation and attribution, and it can be a way to manage your research and enhance your academic profile. And for the institution, the benefits are ensuring the long-term access and preservation of all the institutional or researcher data, provides a way to track the academic output, the grants awarded to the institution, and so on. And again, persistent identifiers can lead back to the institution. So this is another good way to showcase research. So we're going to pause here. Christina, have you been monitoring? Are there questions in the chat? Okay.
I'm just looking in the chat right now. I don't see any questions at this time. People can use the chat function or the Q&A function to ask questions as we move forward. And we'll pause again throughout the presentation to actually solicit some of those questions and answers. So I see none right now.
Can I interrupt? I just want to add on to something Donna said that I should have mentioned earlier. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. This one here where it enables you to meet funding and publisher requirements. I just want to say that it's not just the tri-agency that is asking for data deposits. So the Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust Foundation, NIH, certain funding opportunities there, they are all asking their grant recipients to deposit their data. And many journals are now doing this as well. So it's not just the tri-agency that is requiring this. In fact, they're sort of a late adopter of this policy. So there's lots of reasons.
So I see no questions. Thanks for that, Joanna. Sure. See no questions, so we could probably move on.
Okay, so there are different types of research data repository available. They come in different shapes and forms and can be identified in 3 major types. Just checking, do you guys can hear me or? Okay, thank you. By the way, this is Lin. So first type of repository we call multidisciplinary, or sometimes we call generalist repository. So this type often accepts all kinds of data, regardless of your type, format, or discipline. So in this category, we often mention Mendeley data or Borellus. And second type is discipline or domain-specific repositories. This type of repo typically accepts domain-specific data with different requirements on metadata, file format, etc. For example, the Polar Data Catalog provides access to data created by Arctic and Antarctic researchers. Another example is OMIM. It covers data on human genes and genetic phenotypes. The last one is called government. This type of repo is built by the government at different level, for example, federal, provincial, or city. So if your research is done on behalf of government or department or agency, so you may use them for your data. 2 examples in this category, like Open Data Canada or Open Data Toronto. Next, please. So we have talked about what data repository is and its major types. Our next logical question is how to find one for your data. Choosing a data repository may be impacted by many factors, but we can start from asking some simple questions. Next, please. So this small decision tree is very simple. So first is ask yourself, is there a particular repository required or designated by your research funder or publisher? If yes, of course, no more question, you have to deposit your data in that repository. If no, Is there a domain-specific repository supported by your discipline? If yes, you have to figure out its requirements and processes in order to prepare for the deposit. If it's no, does your institution provide some kind of data repository service? If yes, contact the repository admin for further information. So during the process, if you get stuck or don't know the answer at any point, contact your librarian or research office at your college for advice or recommendations. Next, please. There are some other considerations when choosing a data repository. The list here is by no means exhaustive. So for example, is it a quality repository with good reputation in your field? It refers back to those guiding principles Caitlin talked about before, like fair, trust. You can also talk to your peers to figure out the repository commonly accepted in your research field. Second, what type of data are you going to deposit and share? Does it contain sensitive data such as personal, confidential, health information? So in those cases, extra measures may have to be taken before depositing. Most often, those type of data need to be anonymized or de-identified, or can only be uploaded to a restricted secure environment with some data usage agreements. Related to this question is that, like, do you need restricted access to your data when needed? Like we mentioned, you can embargo your data as well. Other consideration like the size of data also matters. Repository often have a size limit on how large a file can be uploaded. You may have to choose one over another because of this size limit. Some more question like consideration like, does a repository provide unique identifier to make sure your data be cited and found persistent, like the DOI Donna talked about? Any preservation process to ensure data integrity. Last but not least, data deposit often happens close to the end of your research data lifecycle. So when the data collection and analysis are almost done. So generally speaking, data repository is not suitable to be used as a place to store active research data. Here, I mean, most means raw data. For example, you need to add or update, delete those data constantly every day. If that's the case, you should look for like research data storage option. With that being said, it doesn't mean you wait until the last minute to determine which data repository to use. So we recommend you explore and choose a data repository as early as possible as part of your research planning. By this way, it will give yourself sufficient time to understand the requirements of particular repository. For example, the file format it requires, a particular metadata standards it actually use, any other documentation needed for the deposit. Those requirements may also impact how you collect, document, and manage your research data in general during your active research phases. Finding a repository for your research data is challenging. We strongly suggest you talk to your librarian or research office to discuss your research data needs for recommendation as early as possible. Next, please. So when searching a research data repository, especially for domain or discipline specific repository, here's some place you can start. First is like RIS3 data is a good place to start. It is registry of research data repository globally. So you can search through its comprehensive list of discipline to figure out or find a repo for your data. There are two other common general list data repository for Canadian researchers to consider. First is Borellus, and Caitlin, I believe She will give us a quick tour on Borealis shortly. And next is a federated research data repository. It is a national multidisciplinary repository for sharing and preserving Canadian research data. Good thing is it supports large data sets, usually like over 3 gigabytes. Thank you.
So we're going to pause here for questions. Do folks have any questions as we're moving forward? Because we want to give you guys ample time to ask. Please use the chat or question and answer function. You can put them in. And I'm not seeing any questions come in thus far. Nope. So no questions at this time. Again, we'll pause again for questions from folks. We can continue to move forward.
Okay, so I am just going to expand a bit on what Ling Ling had said and talk more in greater detail about the Borealis. Borealis, the Canadian Dataverse repository. You might also be familiar with the idea of Dataverse as another naming concept. Next slide, please, Christina. So just a little background information about what Borealis is. So Borealis is a Canadian Dataverse repository. It's bilingual, multidisciplinary, secure Canadian research data repository, and it's supported by academic libraries and research institutions across Canada. It supports things like open discovery, management, sharing, and the preservation of Canadian research data. It's an open source repository, and it was developed at Harvard University with contributors and adopters across Canada, as well as internationally. Next slide, please.
I have very busy.
So Borealis is free and secure data repository. The files are held on Canadian servers, which is can be a big bonus for some researchers. Researchers have a lot of control. They can choose to make the content uploaded available to the public, to specific individuals or collaborators, or to keep it locked and restricted. Ontario colleges, through a consortium, are exploring agreements with Borealis. Many Ontario colleges are brokering agreements and will have Borealis instances in the next year, with hopefully even greater adoption of Borealis in the college sector in the next few years. Next slide, please. So what is Borealis for? When would you use it? So the purpose of Borealis, as we've been discussing, but just to reiterate, is to store research data of all types, mainly for long-term storage and storage at the end of a project. So you might want to use it for storage data after completion of that project, when that data might need a persistent identifier like a DOI. So DOI, just so we're all on the same page, digital object identifier, the string of numbers, letters, and symbols used to permanently identify an article or document, in this case a data set, and link it somewhere on the web. So it can help easily locate that data and connect it, so we'll always refer back to it. Sort of like a SIN number for your data set. Finally, Borealis can be used to make your data more discoverable and open. So Borealis data, if researchers so choose, indexed in a variety of places. So it's indexed in Google Scholar. It's pulled into Further, the larger Canadian data repository. And so it really expands the potential of research data for an institution and for individual researchers. Next slide, please. So how does it work? Getting started with Borealis is pretty straightforward. Users create an account, and they can select add a data set and provide some descriptive metadata, so using some prompts, and then you can upload your data. So that's really sort of simplifying it, but that is really how it is. It's very user-friendly. Just to note, the ability to create an account and upload data is limited to subscribed institutions. However, if you're not a subscribed institution, you can still view like the open and public data sets and institutions' individual instances. And if you're interested in exploring sort of the workflows behind uploading data and your institution is not a subscriber, there's a lot of guides and support information that are available on the Borealis website as well, so you can view sort of what that process would be like. And as I said, you're also able to view the Borealis instances and data sets without logging in or having an account, which is what we're going to do next. Next slide, please. So we're going to take a tour. So when we look at Borealis, since there are currently no college instances yet, though many are very, very close, we're going to look at Brock University's Borealis instance today. So just please bear with me as I navigate us over there.
I'm going to stop sharing, okay, so that you can
Okay.
share your screen.
Sounds good.
Perfect.
Can see it?
Yep.
All right, excellent. So this is what it looks like. You can see that it is institution specific. Brock University's name logo is right up there at the top. We can scroll down and this is what it looks like. It's quite similar to a traditional database. You have the results in the middle and then filters on the left. So here are the results of everything that is there. You can see on the left, if we look at the sort of the organizational structure, there are dataverses that are set up in different data sets, and the dataverse categories are broken down. So we have research projects and research groups. That's the functionality of Borealis. You can look at things sort of however you'd like to: publication year, author name, subjects, keyword terms, and deposit dates. And you can scroll down here and see a variety of different types of data as we go through there. And so I'm going to pick one as an example, fostering ocean empathy through future scenarios. So this is what it looks like at a particular data set record. You can access the data set over here. There's different download options. You can see some metrics. You can see a bit more if you look, if you were the owner of the data set, but you can also see some metrics like here. So how many times has this data set been downloaded? The data, the description, keywords, all of this information would have been uploaded by the user. So that's very adaptable there. And then we've got the related publication. So this data set is related to through a publication in People in Nature. And you have the link there. The license agreement, which is something that you are able to choose when you upload your data. There's a drop-down menu. You can pick which license agreement you would like your data to have. And then we have the actual file down here. Again, you can see some of that metadata. So that's that DOI, the persistent identifier that I was speaking about earlier. Title, authors. This was a collaborative project, so you can see a number are from Brock University, but also collaborated with researchers at the University of Tasmania and University of the Sunshine Coast, UBC, things like that. The point of contact, so there's the ability to contact the owner up here if that's something that you're interested in. Keywords, again, that related publication date. Terms, so that's that license there, and then version. So we just have one version here, but if you were to upload additional versions, that would there's versioning capabilities as well. That's one that's pretty open. I wanted to also show an example of one that is restricted, so you can get an idea of what that looks like. Here. So this is the library standards for rock names, and under the description right here, you can see that it's limited to members of the institutional community. So there's ability to log in if you're part of that community, but if you're not, you can see some information, but you can't actually access it. So that's another option for researchers as well. In that case, you can see some of this information. If, let's say, you came upon a restricted data set that you may want to access, you can always contact the owner and find out more information there. You can check out that related publication. So the different levels of ability to connect and relate there. So again, you see that little lock, that red lock there, indicating that that is restricted there. Back, and there you can just see right over here is the add data button for how you add data. You can either create a new data set or a new data verse. Let's very, very quickly show you what that would look like. So you have names, affiliations, point of contact. You can see a description, subject, keywords, a lot of information here, a lot of sort of guided fields, and you can fill out those sort of as you wish. Some of those are required, some of them are not, and it's really customizable to the type of data you're putting in and to the users themselves. So you can do all of that, and then you can upload your information, and you're good to go. Of course, a lot more information around that, but that's the general sort of quick introduction. It really is quite user friendly. And I'm going to try to figure out how to stop sharing now. Okay.
And I'll present back in Teams, so just give me a second here.
Excellent.
Let me just resume from where we were. Zoom. There we go. Can you see
Okay.
that?
It looks good. You can probably skip through the slides really quickly because I have some screenshots. So
Oh my
we'll stop
goodness.
maybe at the Mendeley data page, and I think
Okay.
Joanna's going to speak a bit about that as another spot.
Okay, hold on. There we
There
go.
we go. And I'm not going to go into Mendeley data, but I do just want to point to it as another repository that any researcher can join. You can see the sign in button there. And really, once you've created an account, so right next to the sign in button, create account, and then you can start loading data. And it has some of the same functionality that Kaylin was showing with Borealis. So it does create DOIs. It gives you the opportunity to make your data private or restricted. It accepts any file format up to 10 gigs, and it's freely available to any researcher. Mendeley data is managed by Elsevier, so anyone who is publishing in Elsevier journals, some journals have a mandatory data deposit policy, so they would be asked to make their data available in this repository. And I just want to point out, I'm hoping you can see some of the data types, some of the filters that are available there. So this is what a data repository offers that really an institutional repository wouldn't, right? Is these filters based on data type. So this is why you access a data repository rather than the institutional repository, because it has these bells and whistles. Yeah, I think that was all I was going to mention about Mendeley data. Move forward. I think we're going to hand it over to Donna. We're wrapping up.
All right, back to me. Yeah, so I think what we'll do is we'll pose these as questions. They're going to be takeaway questions. So perhaps you might go back to your institution and engage in additional discussions with your partners. So first question we would ask is, do you know if your institution provides support? Sorry, there's an error there. We'll fix that before we share the slides. Do you know if your institution provides support for data deposit? And if so, what does this look like? Is it like, do you have dedicated personnel already to support this? Or is it maybe ad hoc support? Is it in the library? Is it in the research office? If you do not yet support data deposit, what might future support for data deposit look like? Again, might you just facilitate access to a data repository and then folks can just go ahead and deposit like unmediated access to it? If you do that, that might, I mean, there is the potential, I suppose, for sensitive data to be deposited. So again, if you decide that you maybe do need dedicated personnel, where would that live? Like, where would the support live? In the research office, in the library? At Fanshawe, we've decided that the library will help us set up our Borealis subscription, but the research office will provide support for it. But in conversations with my colleagues, I hear a lot of folks saying this will likely live in the library. So my point is you will have to decide what makes sense for your institution and your researchers. And I think we're going to move on, Christina, to open the floor.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if people have questions, please feel free to type it in the chat. You can also raise your hand and unmute yourself to ask a question. We wanted to give lots of time because we know this is a lot of content to throw at people. Cheryl?
Hi, thanks everybody. This has been an excellent session, by the way. I took lots of notes. This is probably a really early question, like an early time to ask the question, and I put it in the Q&A, but how are institutions planning to create that balance between the obligations for protecting and respecting commercialization, IP creation, with their desire and need to make as much of the data as usable for future research or not? And I was thinking, like, trying to explain what I mean is, like, is there considering a checklist or a set of criteria that has, contains sensitive information? There's a, something in the partnership agreement that restricts the ability for share. Like, and I'm just trying to think of how practical, or how we're going to practically apply this decision.
A great question. What do you guys think?
We,
Or what do
we
others
are,
think?
yeah, I can say that I've had conversations at my institution with the research folks who are working with external partners with IP. I want to say issues, but interests, and yeah, they conversations continue, and I have suggested sort of that restricted access. That really, people want to know that the data exists, right? You can restrict it and mediate access. So not allow access, but just describing the data, I think, is huge. And I will say the research folks I spoke to aren't even comfortable with that. Like, no, these are trade secrets. We can't talk about them. So those are the conversations that I'm having. I don't know where this will land, and we are also talking about expanding the IP policy at our institution to cover these scenarios. So coming up with some sort of checklist or some sort of institutional policy. Or I've also heard suggestion of cross-institutional policies, because so many colleges will be dealing with this as well. So that's where my institution's at. We don't know. We're trying.
I feel like a lot of institutions are still in that I don't know period. So it's a good question, Cheryl, and maybe something we can keep attuned to, because I see a lot of crossover between our IP, the IP work that we're trying to do as colleges, and the data work that we're trying to do as colleges, right? It's a great question, though. Any other questions? Just monitoring Q&A and chat as well.
And I just see the question from Michael about costs associated. So Kaylin answered that the cost for Borealis is held by the institution. The individual doesn't have to bear any of that cost. With Mendeley data, there is no cost to the researcher or the institution unless they develop their own instance. So any researcher can submit to Mendeley with no cost, and the file size limit is 10 gigs.
But there is a cost, right, to the institution, and there's a consortium that negotiates those costs, correct?
For Borealis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the cost is varied based on institution.
Yeah.
Possibly FTE. And so I think Borealis probably be very happy for anyone to reach out and discuss that with them and explore that.
I do see a question from Cynthia. They explored Borealis, but their IT department requires an HEC BAT, a questionnaire designed to measure vendor risk. Just wondering if anybody else has experienced this. They've declined to fill out the actual, Borealis has declined that actual questionnaire. I guess another good question.
Yeah, they directed us to their website to just review their points that they had on there. And our IT department did take the time to review that and said, it kind of looks like you have the things that meet our requirements, but we don't know actually how you're using it. So we were kind of hoping that if they just filled out the form once, everybody could use that. But because they're not truly a vendor, right? It's U of T. Anyway, I just wondered if anybody else had this requirement from IT and how you got around it.
You might see more of that as we try to negotiate Borealis with the colleges. I know that it's up for us in the new fiscal year, so I don't know if that will come up. But it's again another thing to kind of keep attuned to, and especially for the COP members, Donna, I think that this would be something that you could keep attuned to as well. I think we answered the institutional cost for Borealis is dependent on FTE, correct, Kaylin? Something to that effect.
That's my understanding.
It's
Individual, and then there are also the consortiums that's happening in Ontario, possibly other places.
And I see Natalie made an excellent comment. It would be nice to share on best practices of management of confidential data. This is the next step for us. So yeah, I agree. We we will be asking for more ideas from people on things, on resources and different topics that you'd like to see. So stay tuned. But that could be definitely one in terms of bringing that back to our research data management group.
To reiterate what Joanna had said earlier, is that Borealis is a really great option and one that we showcased today. But there are also a lot of other subject specific and other types of data repositories. So there's many options, whether institutions choose not to go with Borealis or not to go with it yet. There's lots of options that are no cost, and your research office and library can help with identifying those.
I don't see any other questions at this time. So if you want to continue with the last two slides, I think they're just more resource sharing. So we have one final question for everybody. And I'll just launch the poll. Well, I think we can put these in the chat in terms of what other topics you'd like to see cover related to RDM. I know we've had some suggestions already made, but if there are other topics you'd like to see covered in a session such as this, or even in a resource, that would be fantastic if you could provide that. Donna, did you have anything to say on this too? I think that was it, right?
No, other than to mention that we have plans to make a
Yes.
collection of resources available to this group, like a little toolkit.
Mhm.
So yeah, put in your suggestions in the chat. We'd love to hear what you're interested in receiving.
Yeah, and just to note that again, we will be sending a survey out to folks immediately following the session to everyone who's attended any one of the sessions that we've offered. And one of the questions will be like, what other topics would you like to see, other resources you'd like to see kind of created, because we will take that all back.
And I'm just seeing one comment from Natalie and Cheryl about workshopping best practices on management of confidential data. I think that's a fantastic one, and I've heard that from researchers at my institution as well. That really they want a how-to check sheet, step by step how to do these things.
Yeah, agreed. Someone else said, I'd love to attend a workshop on copyright and licensing for data deposit options. Again, something that we could definitely take back. Excellent suggestion. Okay. So this is not changing for me. Apologies.
I think, Christina, that this is the final. Oh no, there is another slide.
Yeah.
We had a list of resources and we figured we would hold off because we will share those at a later date. So maybe that's what's happening there. There's a slide, but it's hidden.
Yeah. So we can launch this last poll question for everybody. So I'm just going to do that right now. So if you learned something that you can apply to your own institution, yes, no, maybe. Saying yes, some saying maybe, suggesting. I'm hoping that no one says no, but if you do, that's okay.
Maybe they knew everything there was to know already.
Great. Oh, someone did say no, and that's okay because you all know everything anyways. Awesome. Okay, so are there any other questions before we close off? No? Just going to go to the Q&A because I don't think there's anything else in there. No. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for attending today's session. I know that they will make this recording available to all of you guys post this session, and we'll send that out. And stay tuned to your emails to see our questionnaire come out. Just a quick 5-minute little feedback survey to see what else we can provide in terms of support. Thanks everybody for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Great weekend.
Great weekend.
Great weekend.